Hi, this is 360 Degrees of Politics, and now we're on to when I decided to go back to university and something, learn something about politics and policy. I originally went out there because I wanted to understand science, because I just realized I didn't understand how the world worked. So I started out in biochemistry, and I enjoyed some of the courses and everything, but on the side, I kept going online and studying more politics and economics and what was wrong with the Soviet Union, why didn't it work? And I think I had maybe I had blocked out the idea of actually being a social scientist from my mind because my father was an economist, and at the time I had some issues with my father, and maybe I just didn't want to think that I would end up following in his footsteps. So I had started out in science, but I found that I was spending all of my time on economics questions and other social science questions and history, and decided that actually if there was some way that I could succeed doing that is really what I wanted to do. And I was buying books, sometimes on Amazon, but always the secondhand part, and sometimes at Better World Books or some other places, for oftentimes just like 5 cents, 1 penny, whatever, and just paying for the shipping. All of these old books, I still have, at least 100 or few hundred of these books around my house. Bukharin and the Bolshevik Revolution, the Russian Revolution by Richard Pipes, Stalin's letters to Molotov, 1917, the Communist Party transcripts, the Bolsheviks, many books by Alec Novi. These are all Sovietology, basically, English language books about the Soviet Union. I also, Marxist.org has many, many things online. Economists, mostly Marxists, but also other economists, full text online. And so, literally reading dozens and then hundreds of these books, I really became a specialist in understanding the economics of the Soviet Union, at least from a Western perspective, but also much of it was actually just English language translation of Russian works, either of Russian thinkers, Soviet thinkers, or of actual official documents. So I became quite expert in this, and because it was very exciting to me to understand what went wrong, why did planning not work? And of course, this led me to the Austrian economists who, like Hayek and Mises and others who had argued from very early on. In fact, some of the predecessors before Mises had been arguing even before the Soviet Union, even before the revolution, about why it wouldn't work, why socialism wouldn't work. And so, of course, I became very excited about this. Really, it was wonderful to really analyze something that seemed fairly straightforward and understand why it didn't work. And it was a basis for understanding economics as a science. And so ultimately, that made me, I became an Austrian economist. But I was a Sovietologist first, in a sense. And so I started writing a book. It took me a long time to get it off the ground, but I wrote my first book, Rediscovering Fire, which is about lessons from the Soviet Union in understanding economics. And so that was my first book. I went with a small publisher because I couldn't get anyone else interested. I didn't even have a first degree, undergraduate degree, but it was a book based in history and in economic history of the Soviet Union, in the history of the Bolsheviks themselves as a party, what their utopian dreams were, what their scientific basis for why it should work was, based in Marxism, and why it failed. And of course, then also lessons for today. I'm still very proud of the book, but I do think some of the lessons for today perhaps make some assumptions. If full socialism doesn't work, that doesn't mean that some government programs can't work. So this was something, as you'll see in my 360 degrees, this is something that I've sort of come back around the other side of, where I say, well, maybe full socialism doesn't work, but that doesn't mean all of the lessons that I pulled from it originally, that Austrians and libertarians pull from it, are true. And in fact, there are some major things that those schools of thought miss, that they miss about capitalism, that they miss about the market system, even without some of the cultural elements. But then they also ignore much of the culture in America, for example, that undermine the ability of the system to produce the outcomes that they would desire, that they would expect, or that they would predict from the market system. So there's a lot that they miss, and that's why I've come back around. But my first book was very gung ho markets, how markets can fix everything and solve everything. I was also working on an agent based program I went out to New Mexico for this, for going back to university. And when I was out in New Mexico, I was doing all of this reading of Sovietology and Marxist.org and all of that. And I was a programmer still, so I wrote a program that basically simulated markets and looked at how markets could, if they're interfered with, how that could have bad, negative ex, unintended consequences and everything, and the flexibility and the dynamism of markets and how they could solve problems and raise incomes and all of that. And I was very excited about seeing the benefits of markets in a way that the mainstream economists couldn't see. And I took some economics courses and I was just shocked at how foolish and simplistic and just lacking the mainstream economists' approach was. And I got to read lots of Austrian economists and see how much more dynamic it was and how it could work with my agent-based programming. And so I discovered all of these George Mason economists. I mean, they all have websites, they all have blogs. So I got to know all of these George Mason economists. That's basically the center for Austrian free market economics in America. And so, spending time on all of their blogs, I got to know all of these Austrian economists at George Mason by name and had interactions with them. And so, finally, I decided I wanted to move to D.C. And go to school at George Mason, which is in Virginia, and also get a job. I found a job summary at the Heritage Foundation. And I thought, wow, I could work in the Heritage Foundation as a center for data analysis, and I could show them my agent-based model, and I could get involved, and I could run their tax model, because I knew programming, and they needed someone who was a programmer and an economist and was interested in free market economics. So I moved to DC, and I didn't get the job right away, but I did ultimately get it, and that will be the subject for the next segment.